Mike, today we're talking about episode number 10 of Co-Created, the sweet synergy of donuts and digital narratives in mental health with Makaylah Rogers. This episode was released in March of 2024. Mike, what resonated with you in this conversation?
Yeah, as usual, lots of things. But one of the ones that really stood out to me was just knowing the right time and place to tell a story, right? And Makaylah talked about how, she did 8 years of therapy, to be in the right place to tell a story about suicidal ideation. One of the hardest topics I think you could probably possibly explore in a digital story form. And yeah, doing those 8 years of therapy, and then even then, right, there was you guys had to stop and restart at a point when she went through a bit of a low point, stuff like that. And so to me, that just emphasizes the importance of being first of all, self-aware, but having the right supports and services in place when you're doing digital storytelling facilitation. And I'll tell you something, some of the biggest challenges, ethical challenges I've ever heard is from people who just throw themselves into these types of situations without having a robust ethical framework to fall back on to help guide them through the process. And for me, that's one of the most important things I think that common language does, right? Is
Mhm.
we give people a good place to start. And I was just thinking, I just finished training with a bunch of researchers and community organizations. And one of the things that the executive director of one of these organizations said is, I wish we had thought about this for a few other projects that we have
Mhm.
done in the past, because they were like, it would have saved a whole lot of difficult conversations and some stressors and things like that if we had been aware of all the sort of ethical nuances around creating personal stories and sharing them in a public way. And so, anyways, it just sort of brought that back to me, like, wow, having Kristy there to help guide Makaylah through this process, but also having Makaylah be in the right place to tell a difficult story like this, how important that is. And I think for all the organizations out there thinking about doing digital storytelling, that's why you want to work with someone with training, right? Someone
Right.
who's been trained to think through all these ethical implications.
Well, and I think that there were so many pieces that went into it. Makaylah already knew a lot about digital storytelling. We're friends. We
Yeah.
have talked
Hmm.
about this a lot. They had seen a lot of stories before they committed to the idea. And then we spent a
Hmm.
lot of time working on it. There were days where we were in tears leaving and we would check in on each other
Yeah.
after the fact.
No doubt. Yeah.
And then I think also the way common language has a decision aid. So
Yeah.
as we're planning a project, that was the first story that I was really like, "Oh my gosh, I need this part about how do I talk to Makaylah about the facilitation methods? How do we pre-brief
Mm.
this and debrief this? How do we set it up for facilitation in
Yeah.
front of an audience?" And
For the
so
audience.
Makaylah and I spent a lot of time talking about, is there a screen at the beginning? Is there a screen at the end? How do we share this information? Makaylah actually has
Hmm.
like a link to resources on their website that they
Yeah.
have kind of approved and tested out and want to share because they believe in those resources. So it that was the my first experience with a story that um is that necessary to think about audience well-being as well as storyteller
Hmm.
well-being.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I was surprised at some of the questions you guys got in your discussion afterwards, right? Like she said, or they said, sorry, one of the questions was, who is at fault when someone commits suicide? I was like, wow, how do you have that conversation? But at the same time, this is something that is probably in the back of people's minds. They're sort of like, like we always look for someone to blame when this stuff happens, right? Is
Mhm.
it the organization, or is it the support organizations? Is it the friends and family? Is it the policy decisions of our government? Like we're always looking for someone to blame. And man, I thought the way that you guys talked about that on the podcast was just really well done, right? And navigating those in a live screening situation sort of shows the importance of being ready and prepared to
Mhm.
share stories like this. And like in the decision aid, we give a bunch of suggested facilitation methods. One of those for high risk stories, like we would call this one, is making sure there's a trained facilitator there to guide that conversation to make sure that ends up in a positive and productive way, right? So
Well,
so anyways, there's so much about that, but that was the thing that really stood out to me, that element there for sure.
and I think Makaylah does a phenomenal job of that. They do facilitated workshops on difficult
Mhm.
topics. And so
Yeah,
that
the right
also
person to
helped.
tell that story.
We both got to bounce ideas off of each other. But we
Yeah.
were talking about the sweet synergy of donuts and digital narratives and mental health, an episode with Makaylah Rogers. It was number 10. It was released in March of 2024. You can find the link to that episode as well as Makaylah's digital story in the show
Mhm.
notes.